One of the most important things to watch for when dealing with digital capture is being aware of the numbers that relate to the 8-bit output of a file. I'm going to take a look at a little chart that I've created here, and this shows the 256 levels of information. We start with 0 as pure black and 255 is pure white. Now, there's nothing wrong with having a pure white or a pure black in a photograph, but the thing we have to watch for the most is where white with detail and where black with detail fall. Now, we know on this scale that 128 is going to be our zone 5 middle gray, but the key thing is white with detail. We want to expose for proper highlight detail. On that scale of 0 to 255, around 240 to 245 is where we start to leave that detail behind. Between 245 and 255, that is where we're starting to see some of the information just completely disappear and go to a pure white. The most important thing here is to retain that detail. On the dark side, we have below 20 to 25, we're going to start to go down to no detail at all. If we were looking at a bridal picture, say a bride and a groom on the altar getting married, we'd want the highlight area, the bride's dress, to be around 240 to 245 and the groom's tuxedo to be 20 to 25. That's where we're going to hold that detail. Keeping that in mind, we apply that, of course, to all types of photography, whether it's landscape or product or so forth. So let's take a look at some images, the image we took here earlier. And we're going to open up, I'll select the shoe, and I'm also going to select the grayscale, and we'll go ahead and open them up in Adobe Camera Raw. And I'm going to go ahead and select them all. First thing I'll do is actually select all, and we're looking at the actual grayscale. I always want to go ahead and do a neutral balance, so I'll click on that, and that's going to lock down my neutral color. And because I've selected all, it applies to both of the photographs. So looking at the shoe we took, looks pretty good right out of the gate. We'll go over to our camera profile, and we can take a look at the one that we created, the 1DS Mark II, and it really didn't change the color much, which means that the profile coming with the camera right out of the gate is pretty good, but this really just, in some cases, will really move those colors around a little bit to be a little bit more accurate. So we have our image. Let's go back and we'll start at Camera Raw. We know that our color is correct because we've already done our neutralization. And first thing I like to do is hold down my Option or Alt key on the PC, and as I do that, I can go into the threshold mode, and if I move that up, we can start to see where the whites start to disappear, and I'm going to go ahead and bring those back down again. Obviously, we don't want to be that high. We'll bring it back down. As we bring that down, we can see that these areas are as I hold down that key, it goes right into threshold mode. We can really see where those areas are blowing out. Plus, I'm also watching that histogram. Now, as I look at that, I can see 226, 224. Those are pretty good in here. I like what's going on there. I then go to my blacks. I do the same thing where I hold the Option key down and click on the blacks. It goes into a threshold mode, and we see areas, as we bring that up, areas that are going to go down to 0. Now, I do want to have some black, detail in my blacks in here. I'm thinking it's looking pretty good in there. If we need to now fill it in a little bit, I'll bring up my fill light. In this case, we don't need any recovery because I think we don't see any areas that are blown out. I usually add just a little bit of clarity, which boosts my mid-tone contrast a little bit. I'm being very accurate with the colors. Sometimes I'll just give it a little touch of vibrance just to beef up the colors just a little bit. I'm going to leave my saturation alone. I'm going to move over to my sharpness, and I tend to be around 75 with a radius of 1 to 1.5 if it really needs it, but 1 is really pretty good. As I hold down my Option key, you can see the areas right here with masking. It shows just the areas that it's going to sharpen. If I pull it down less, you'll see that we're going to sharpen a lot more areas around the image. And as I move it up higher and higher, up as it's going to catch up with me, we're only looking at areas where the white touches the light areas touch the dark areas. So that's looking pretty good. That's the only areas you really want to sharpen there. And I'm going to leave my my noise reduction down to some lower numbers. There's not a lot of noise in here, so we're okay there. So I think we're ready to open the file. Let's go ahead and open that up into Photoshop. Now I've opened up the file and I've left it as an 8-bit file because we're not going to really do a lot of tonal control. If I need to move my tones around, it is more important for me to open up as a 16-bit file, which is a lot less damaging. As I move the file and move the tones around or color around, it's going to be a lot less damaging to the file. So in this case, what the client really wants is going to be a really pure white background, because if they drop this into a white page, we don't want to see the edges of the shot. So I'm going to look at my info palette for a second. As I come over here, I can see that, yeah, I got good detail in the shoes, perfect detail, white detail approaching the 240 mark, great, but my background is again not 255. It's in the same 230s to 240s. So it's very hard to shoot something white on white and get the detail on that in order for this to be a pure 255 white. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a clipping path, or actually a path on this, to isolate the image. So we're going to work with the pen tool. I think the pen tool is one of the most powerful tools in Photoshop. It's one of those tools that you tend to not use as much a lot of times because you feel it's too much manual operation. It just takes a little practice. So I'm going to pick my pen tool and I'm going to go ahead and look at my options right from the very beginning. If you've never used it, it's going to be set up on this shape tool. So if you ever get something that looks like this and you say, why am I getting these black shapes? That's because you're creating a shape, and that's what the default setting is when you first launch that tool. So what you want to do is go to the second box, which is your pen tool. I'm going to pick the pen, and by default, it's set up in this first of the four ways it works, the four boxes. I go to the fourth box. This allows me to say if I have to cut out a hole inside something with a shape, when I change that to a selection, that shape will be recognized. If you do not do that, if you cut out a circle, then a circle within the circle, and I use just that first box, you're not going to get that inside circle to actually be represented in the selection. So I always go to that fourth box. So I'm looking also that I want to have the auto add and delete, and I like to have the rubber band option because that makes it work very nicely as far as adding, working through the points here. I tend to work from 12 o'clock noon clockwise all the way around, so I kind of always get a feel for where I have to go. So I'm going to zoom in here. I'm going to move my palettes, and I'm going to take off my tools because I don't need to have those open while I'm working. So I'm going to start right in here, and I'm going to put 1 point. Now when I lay 1 point in here, you notice I don't actually want to hold down my option key or drag anything. I like to start with one solid point, and I'm going to move around the image, and I'm going to click and drag. When I say click and drag, is I'm putting a point down and moving the mouse. I'm actually using a stylus instead of a mouse, but it's the same difference. I'm going to click and drag. Now this is called my Bezier curve, and I find it a lot like playing billiards, in the sense that when you're playing billiards, and also maybe think of it like playing chess, that you're not only doing the move that you're working on, but you're thinking about a couple of moves ahead. And that's the key thing with doing the pen tool, is thinking about where you're going to end up to be for the next move. And I do have some nice little humps here in the shoe, and I don't want to just cut them off, so I'm going to come click and pull, click and drag around these little holes. So it's a little teeny little movements, and I don't just put dots down. Each one of these is dragged just a little bit, and it's dragged so they have little tiny curves. If I move in even closer, move that up, you can see what's going on here. As I come around, I'll move real quickly through here. And if I see something that I really don't want in the shoe, I can always just cut that part off. And I do that a lot with products that are not really good shape. A lot of times with clothing, I'll eliminate bumps and things like that. So here I'm coming around longer curves. The key thing is not as many points. There's only using the minimum amount of points we need to get the job done. I'm going to go to click and pull, moving a little faster here. And if any point I don't like something, I can always either add another point. Because of the plus and minus, I can put a point in at any one point, and you can see it has the Bezier curves, or I can remove a point if I click on a point that was already there. That's not good, Command Z that. But another thing is, by holding down the Command key or on the PC the Control key, I can actually move the points and the handles. Okay, so I can literally change what's going on in here and the shape. So let's quickly move through here. Now that I have the path completed, the next step is I'll bring the tools up, and we can see that we have a work path in the path panel. I will double click that and it turns it into path number 1. That way when we're working with a page layout program like InDesign, this could be utilized as a clipping path and can drop everything outside of that path away so that they can easily drop that in. Now, many clients may not want that shadow on here, but I like the real shadow, so I try to offer this to my clients as much as possible. Now, the first thing I want to do is hold down my command key or the control key, click on the icon, and that is going to turn that into a selection. One of the things that I like to do is, before we go into refine edge, is I'm going to change my quick mask options. By default, you have it set as color indicates masked areas at 50%. That's what it's set for. So let's take a look at that. Now that means that yes, it works just like it did in the darkroom. The mask is basically reflecting what we used to call ruby lith. It is blocking the area, letting the shoe come through. One of the things that I like to do that makes my life a lot easier, and this is just something as an option for you, is I change that so that the color indicates the selected area and is at 100%. The reason I do that is when I go into Quick Mask, I find it easier to see what is selected rather than what is not selected. It's just over a long period of over 15 years in digital capture and in 15 years before that using RubyLith and this stuff in the darkroom, I've just worked with this a lot, and I find it so much easier to see it like this, especially when you're working with the edge. Now, because of that, when we go into Refine Edge, I'm just going to click into any of the selection tools and pick Refine Edge. When we get this dialog box, if we go into Overlay, it ties into that preference. Whatever the preference for Quick Mask is, we're going to see it here. So we can see it on black. We can see it on, in this case, on white, which is really clean. Now, you can see the difference as I move in here. You can see now that that edge is white with detail against the 255 white. We can really see that stand out. But one of the things we have to think about with selections is there's no such thing in my mind as a selection that doesn't need a slight feathering to it. The only time we wouldn't do that would be with type, which we want very crisp. But with any kind of photographic element, there's always going to be a slight transition from one tone to another. It isn't just cut off with a razor blade. So what I tend to do is feather. My favorite number is 0.3. Is I just basically will do a 0.3, and I know that seems like very little, but let's go back to the overlay here. If we move in very, very closely, we can start to go from nothing to, you can see a little bit as we come. We don't want it to get like 1 or 2 points because then it gets a very soft edge. But about 3 to 4 tenths of a pixel will give a very, 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 if I just put the, I'll go down to nothing. You can see this here. That's with nothing, with 0. But if we just do the 0.3, watch what happens. It has a slight variance of going from the selected area to the non-selected area, and you can see there's a transition from the red to pink to light pink to white. That means we're going to have a transition of tone, so it's not going to be so sharp of an edge, and that's something that gives away a lot of our selections is it's sharper than the actual transition of tones in the photograph. So with that in mind, we've got our selection set here. We'll go down to full size here. Now, the first thing I want to do is I can, there's a couple different things we can do here. We want to possibly just separate that shoe from, so we go to the layers palette and we can do a Command J or Control J, which is basically going to put that on its own layer. So here we have the shoe basically floating on its own layer, and if that's what the client wants, we can just, of course, fill it in the background. But I'm going to do something a little different here. I want to keep that shadow. So I'm going to go to my Channels panel, and I'm going to hold down my Command key and click the RGB component channel. And what this does is it loads this as a selection. Now, if I'm going to hit my Q key or go down here to the Quick Mask and look at that, what that just did is the brighter the pixel, the more heavier the selection. The less bright the pixel, the less selection. So that's okay, but it doesn't look very interesting here. But watch what happens when I invert this. Command I or Control I in the PC. I inverted this, and I think you can see that now all the shadow areas are selected. So while we're in this quick mask mode, I can go into levels, Command L or Control L will bring up my levels palette, my control box here, and I can literally control exactly where I want that to be. And as I'm looking at that red area represents the shadow that's going to be selected. So I'm going to say I want it nice and clean, so I'm going to just move it in a little bit like that, hit OK. And I'll go back to my layers, I'll go back to that background, get out of quick mask mode, and I'm going to lift that off as its own layer. Command J or Control J, again, has lifted that off. So if I turn that off and turn that off here, what do I have here? I have a very odd looking piece here, but I've got this shadow. Now I can actually fill that. I'm going to go ahead and click the lock button, and I've got black as my foreground color. I'll go to Edit, Fill, and I'm going to fill with foreground color. Hit OK. Well, actually, before I do that, I have preserved transparency. One thing I did say, I do have the transparency preserved, so I don't want it to fill in any of the other areas. So we'll do Edit, Fill, foreground color. Okay. So what I just did is I filled this in with black. So you've got this black edge. Now the shoe sits on top of that, and you can see that the shoe will cover up the other parts of that shoe. But what I have now is a shadow down in here that if I actually move that shoe off for a second, I'll just take my move tool, and you can see as I move that off, that shoe shadow is lying underneath there. So that means that when I brighten up this background layer, I can actually keep that original shadow. So I don't even have to even brighten. I can just fill it in with white. So I'll go, I'm on the background layer. I can now say Edit, Fill, and say background color is white. Hit OK. Boom. And I have just filled that in with pure 255 white. So we bring our info palette up here. We can see we're 255 white everywhere we need to be. And we actually have the real shadow showing here. So we can connect these two together. I'll hold down my shift key and they're connected, and as I can actually literally move that around, and anywhere I put that on another background or any place I need to, I can actually keep that real shadow. If we change this, just to give you an example, if we change this background here and put a gradient, let's go ahead and go to our gradient tool, and we'll just pick a blue color. Let's do a light blue. Let's do this one to be a kind of a, we'll do a lighter blue here. So I got a light blue, and we'll just use our linear gradient, normal, and we'll just draw a line through here. You can see how the real shadow, I'll go ahead and just click these two together again, and you can see how with the move tools, I move that around. You can see how that shadow moves. So anywhere I put that, you can see that shadow. So it's really great if you want to put it on a textured background or something else. We're able to create an image for the client that is, we'll go ahead and put it back to our white background, that is going to have that 255 white. If we lay that into a page, anywhere we put that, if I went here and clicked back, so it's a white background, went to my crop tool, and you notice how when I put my crop tool, it stops at the edges where you let go and then you can bring it back out. Anywhere I put that, as I say OK, I fill that with white. You can see how now, I'll go ahead and just connect these two together. I can put that shoe anywhere I want on the page, and it's not going to have any edge to it. The edge is 255 white. It'll fade right in. It's going to make the client happy. They can line the images up in InDesign, have the catalog done. We're in business, works out great. The client is so going to appreciate that. This just gives you a good idea of what you can do with this to give the client the most possible options for their dropouts, and let them say that I'll give it to you with the real shadow and a clipping path. The shadow's on its own layer. You can use it or not use it, but if you decide to use it, it's going to be the real shadow, not a fake looking shadow that Photoshop creates.